I want you to think about your favorite story, the one which you keep coming back to and getting something new from it. A story which is so packed with meaning that you gain a new appreciation for it every time you experience it. These stories can take the form of music, TV shows, movies, books, or video games, but I mainly want you to picture a story which you feel is incredibly deep in its material. Some examples for me of those stories are things like Epic the Musical, Avatar: The Last Airbender, and the Spider-Verse series. And while I have talked about the latter numerous times on this channel, I have not talked very much about the former two. What makes something like Epic the Musical and Avatar: The Last Airbender stand out? The simple truth is that they've got good storytelling. But what exactly does that even mean? Well, it's self-explanatory. Storytelling is how you tell your story. It's about the tools you use to convey meaning and plot to the audience. And one of those tools just so happens to be symbolism. Unfortunately for many people, and even a few writers, however, symbolism is often mistaken as the story itself rather than a tool which helps us convey the story. Hitchcock has a great deal of symbolism in his movies, and even though I have watched quite a few of them, I don't know if I would ever call any of his movies riveting stories. Don't get me wrong, Hitchcock is a giant for which the rest of the industry stands on the shoulders of, but when I compare his movies to the movies which I actually enjoy, I find that Hitchcock is somewhat lacking. Yes, there is a ton of Freudian symbolism in Hitchcock's stories. There are plenty of techniques and means of visual storytelling which Hitchcock invented that are still used to this day. However, Hitchcock is only the founder of those techniques. I don't think he's the one who perfected them. I think it often takes several generations of trial and error before people come to perfect new techniques in storytelling. But one thing Hitchcock always did correctly was telling a story even if people did not understand all of the symbolic meaning he put into them. And I think that's the key point I want to hit upon in this video. Symbolism is absolutely nothing without a good story. And the only way you can truly make your symbolism shine is by first having a surface level story which stands on its own. Bakemonogatari is a series which I fail to understand in every sense of the term. I have no idea why people like it, and when I tried to watch it myself, I know that I could hear the CPU fan in my brain kick on just to prevent it from melting out of my ears. The Monogatari series is a good example of what I like to view as pretentious storytelling. It's a story which is so focused on the deep symbolic and subliminal messaging that it has forgotten to actually tell a coherent story to anyone who is not a hyperfixated neurodivergent. And I can acknowledge just as well as anyone that some things are just not written for me. However, I wish to unpack why I think something like Bakemonogatari is a heavily overrated story, if we can even call it a story. Aside from the blatant, creepy relationship the show has with children and sexuality, Monogatari is also incredibly difficult to understand. None of the dialogue makes any sense in the context of the story itself because the dialogue is meant to be symbolic and contemplative. No one talks like a real person in the entire show because we are meant to derive hidden meaning from their conversation rather than an actual plot or characterization. There is nearly an entire episode dedicated to our main character not understanding that a girl wants to be his girlfriend, only to see a little girl in the very same episode and start being creepy and drop kicking her for some fucking reason. But we're meant to go, whoa, look, that child has a backpack and it makes her look like a snail, and she's a snail spirit. Isn't that great writing, guys? If you told me to summarize the premise of Bakemonogatari, I wouldn't be able to tell you an answer which I found properly sets your expectations. I would say Bakemonogatari is about a high school boy who exorcises yokai from human beings, but something like that isn't really what the show is about at all. The problem with a show like Bakemonogatari is that I feel the need to read an entire Reddit post unpacking all of the symbolic meaning and subliminal messaging so that I can actually appreciate it. The second problem is that the only thing blatantly understandable about the plot and its characters is how much of a child-touching loser our main protagonist is. So I do think that while some sort of YouTube video essay or Reddit post could help me to understand the story better, I also have no interest in doing so because the content I do understand is utter dog shit. It's also a perfect example of what I mean when I tell you symbolism is not storytelling. There is no story told in Bakemonogatari. It is only symbolism and vague plot points. Characters always speak as if the audience already knows what they're yapping about. Some parts are out of order, others are completely unnecessary to the plot overall. But hey, we get this massively uncomfortable scene of our main protagonist brushing his sister's teeth and getting weirdly aroused by it, so yeah, you can interpret a story there, I guess. In other words, it's peak, or whatever the kids say. However, I'm also not here to say that all audiences must have their hands held as the author ensures that all the meaning of their story is completely understood by everyone who consumes it. I know and enjoy plenty of stories which symbolic meaning is the bulk of the storytelling. The only difference is that the stories which do it correctly are able to be enjoyed without understanding any of the symbolic meaning behind it. Dark Souls and Elden Ring are fantastic examples of this. Most people who have played the games will understand that the plot and the story as a whole really does not matter towards your enjoyment of the game. The reason you play something like Dark Souls or Elden Ring is for the gameplay, the environment, and the experience as well as the characters. Those games always do a great job of making characters who are endearing. The great warrior Jar Alexander, Igon the Drake Knight, Sigmire of Katarina, Solaire of Astora. These are characters which have always instantly resonated with players, and yet we only ever hear a few lines of dialogue from them. Still, the writing for these games is so great that we only ever need a few lines of dialogue to view them as a good character. There are a ton of characters and small sub-stories hidden deep within the Soulsborne games as well, all of which are deeply dark, tragic, and in some ways comforting. We often see characters who are driven by their purpose, and upon either fulfilling that purpose or losing sight of that purpose, those characters are driven to insanity. The characters and their stories have led us through the symbolic meaning of their arcs and overall themes of these games. There is a story to be told, but it is told in the background. It is a series of events which entices the players to reflect and understand why certain characters took action in the way that they do. However, as I said, the reason something like Dark Souls and Elden Ring have such great stories is not because of the symbolism nor the story itself. It's primarily because of the environmental storytelling and the gameplay. It's about the experience the players have in the world. From the difficulty of the bosses to strangely beautiful ruins of a once great civilization, we are not just told the story in Dark Souls or Elden Ring. We are made to feel the story, and symbolism plays no part in that experience. Instead, symbolism helps to tell a second story, and that is the point of this video. Symbolism is not the story, nor should it ever be confused for the primary focus of the story. Symbolism is the story told beneath the original story. Symbolic meaning is conveyed to provide a new layer of meaning to what we already know. There is no point to symbolism if there is nothing else in the story to be found. This is a lesson I wish I had known when I first started writing. I have a family member who works as a professional editor for books and other types of writing publications, and when I completed my first novel, I sent it off to her to read. I think it was the moment that I got that feedback where I truly started to grasp how to actually tell a story. You see, before the time I got that critique back from her, I used to involve quite a bit of symbolism and hidden meaning in my writing, to the detriment of everything else. I thought that I was being clever with how I would hide the story in plain sight, and how there was a mystery and an intrigue about everything that was happening. However, all I really did was confuse the reader. I took pride in how I infused meaning behind something as innocuous as a character ordering one extra beer at the bar, and I somehow expected the reader to understand from that alone that that character was an alcoholic dealing with the loss of their wife and child. High school English classes had drilled into my brain that this was what truly great storytelling was all about. My family member, thankfully, helped me unlearn that. The main critique that I got back from her was, there isn't really a story here. And I would think, well, of course there's a story. Don't you understand all of this symbolic meaning that I've put into the book? And the response I got back was, why did you not just say that part instead? You've got all of these ideas for a story that you need, but you're refusing to tell it in place of some sort of reveal or other thing. And that's what stuck with me to this day. I still use quite a lot of symbolism in my stories, but it's not without first ensuring that there's an actual plot line to be followed. Now, I've also learned that I enjoy writing a more slow-paced type of story, but even so, that has not stopped me from establishing a plot for my characters and the audience by proxy to follow. I can yap all day about the symbolism behind why one of my characters never tells a lie, or why another one of them has boiling water magic and a sea turtle motif, or why one of my main characters always sees themselves reflected in monstrous creatures. I can go on and on about all of those subtle details and how they foreshadow things which will happen much, much later in the story. But that's not storytelling. That is only one aspect of storytelling. It is either the story within the story, or it is the story understood upon reading the main story a second or third time. And then there is the symbolic meaning which I did not intend to write in, but which still makes sense. Sometimes things that we write as authors can have meaning for which we, the authors, did not fully understand when we wrote it. I think people only come to enjoy stories like Bakemonogatari when someone other than the actual writers of the story tells them the story in a concise and understandable way. Think about it. The people who stroke their egos about knowing all the nuances and symbolic meaning behind a very abstract story are also people who likely only understood that meaning because someone else transcribed that meaning into something they could actually understand. Sometimes the audience is a better storyteller than the actual writers of a story. Sometimes a story can only be appreciated when we are able to understand and speculate about its true meaning. Sometimes the story isn't actually as deep as everyone says it is, but people love to be a part of an exclusive club, so they pretend that it is deep. At the end of the day, in order to understand those things, eventually a story has been conveyed to you. I just think that if the prerequisite to understanding what you just watched or read is to Google it, then perhaps it was not much of a story in the first place. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please hit the subscribe button. It turns gay whenever you click it. Also, if you have a few dollars lying around, feel free to hit that join button. I have 3 tiers, and I would greatly appreciate anything that you could send my way, as it helps me make more of these videos in the future. Thank you once again, and have a good one.